mention yes. You wanted to call in?
If he's on his way, we will wait because Dave is gonna go first.
Oh, okay. He's got 45 minutes.
You're gonna have to draw it out.
Yeah.
Talk for 25 minutes.
Call this meeting to order, Stuart City Council special meeting, tentative agenda, Monday, December 1st, 2025, 5:30 p.m. Council chambers. Call to order. Russell.
Here.
Kirkpatrick.
Here.
Morgan. Nelson.
Here.
Kaba.
Here.
Agenda approval, need a motion.
I'll make a motion to approve the agenda.
Second.
Second. How do you vote? Russell.
Yes.
Kirkpatrick.
Yes.
Nelson.
Yes.
Kaba.
Yeah.
Okay, 3, Police Department update, Chief Rehoff.
Does this need to go anywhere special now, or are these working? Or? Okay. Let me get this stuff organized here. I have some handouts. Take one and pass it down. Okay. I'll start with this. If you guys want to read that while I'm at it, that's fine too. But want to inform you that Officer Shane Martinson has accepted an opportunity with the Guthrie County Sheriff's Office. His first day with GCSO is today, the first. He gave us 2 weeks, but obviously this is the first council meeting we had to address it. Want to personally thank Shane for his service to the city of Stuart and for the dedication he has shown during his time with our department. His professionalism, reliability, and willingness to step up in difficult staffing periods have been invaluable. Shane has also agreed to help fill future open shifts as a part-time officer when available. Shane is only days away from the end of his contract with the city. Given his strong work ethic, his willingness to cover vacant shifts, and the financial hardships he has endured at times to keep our department functioning, including extensive overtime and lack of vacation time used, I recommend that the city release him from the remainder of that contract without penalty. Additionally, I ask that the council consider reimbursing Officer Martinson for his unused vacation time for the past 3 years, similar to action taken for Jim Henderson at a recent council meeting. Officer Martinson has taken very few vacation days during his employment. His inability to use this time was directly related to chronic understaffing and the department's need to keep essential shifts covered. I recommend that you work directly with Officer Martinson to determine a fair, accurate compensation amount based on the time he was unable to use. Excuse me. Any questions on that part?
How many days is he?
I think it's like 17 days.
My graduation date was the 17th of December. Okay.
Hang on a second, just a second, Chief. Actually, I guess I need to ask you, so, I don't know what the contract says. Have we ever done anything like that before?
I don't have anything to do with this, so Chief
Oh,
will be the one to
okay.
ask.
Okay, I don't, like I said, I don't know, even if we have a policy, if somebody's that close, because I don't know if this is the first time we'd be doing it, and if we did it, that's definitely setting a precedent, so we'd have to consider some sort of a policy if they're like within the last month or something. I don't have an issue with it personally, can't speak for you guys, but I think that's something we need to consider also, so, going forward, because I know this could happen down the road too, where you get somebody that's that close and they have an opportunity, so.
Sure. I do know that in the past, I think even before I was here, there's been some times where the council's worked out different contracts with different employees. I agree, it would be nice to have a policy, but unfortunately, I think it's been kind of handled just differently each time, so I don't really have a
Okay.
standard set way to tell you.
Okay.
The way the contract's written is that 4th year, he would have to reimburse a portion of the academy costs and all that stuff until that year was expired. So I mean, technically, by definition of the contract, he would still be within that last year of his contract.
Right.
So he would be, if you guys don't waive that, he would be required to pay back a portion of the contract, or a portion of the cost.
So I know you just told us that we would have to visit with Mr. Martinson on the vacation or whatnot, whatever, but would you happen
Absolutely. And-
summit us or
Yep.
whatever, so.
And what I'm just simply giving my recommendation. He's obviously gonna come and ask you formally for that.
Sure.
So I think it's best that you work with him
Okay,
on both of
okay.
those issues. I just wanted to, since I was talking first, I wanted to, give you my input on it. But I do think that, talking to him would be best,
Okay.
on that stuff. So,
One other thing, is that something that you would talk to Shane about or could, and then get it back to council instead of, or is that something all of us, we need to sit here and have him up here and going back and forth, which I don't know if we need to be negotiating in a
Yeah.
public meeting.
Yeah.
yeah, and by no means was I suggesting that. I think he just
Okay.
has his own statement he wanted to make to all of you and whatnot.
Okay.
Normal when someone leaves.
Sure.
But I don't think I don't wanna speak for him, but I don't think he was expecting us to negotiate tonight on any of that stuff. I think
Well, I'm just saying, when it comes to it, I think maybe sit down.
Yep.
I'm just kinda looking towards my other council members to see if that'd be appropriate to have that so,
Yep.
okay,
We've
all right.
got another meeting at 8.
Yeah.
Yeah, next
so-
Monday.
So, I got one little more part on this, and then I'll let him talk, and then I'll go into a different issue, but, so with Officer Martinson's departure, and Officer Luis Lopez, who we'll introduce here in a second, he's our new officer. Luis is gonna be attending the Law Enforcement Academy January through April. So the department's gonna be significantly short-staffed. We're gonna have 2 open shifts for the next 4 months until we can fill, Shane's position. So the shifts that Martinson previously covered will go unfilled, creating an immediate impact on the school resource officer program. The contract that we have with the school is that whenever this happens, we recall the SRO program and, she would then fill normal shifts. Until we hire and train another full-time officer, we cannot maintain a full-time SRO. This pause will temporarily suspend the school district's reimbursement, that they make to us. Obviously, we can't bill them for any hours if she's not out there working, so that's a financial, hardship on the department. Additionally, the COPS hiring grant, which covers most officers' Lopez salary, requires that his position be in addition to our existing staffing level. So it's just important that we work very quickly to get that filled, because technically that is for that position. So, we don't wanna risk losing our funding that we got from the COPS grant. Any questions on either of those 2 things? And I'll go into some detail on what I think the overtime's gonna look like and stuff like that, but, I wanted to make sure Shane had the ability to talk, and then we'll introduce Luis to you guys real quick.
Do you still have applications from when we hired Luis?
Yes, but none of them that would qualify to continue.
Okay.
So I've already started the hiring process. I put an ad out, and, we'll try to get applicants as fast. I did make a post, so we have a law enforcement only Facebook group. It's got tons of officers in there for Iowa. I kind of made an appeal to them on there, and we've gotten some interest on that. We've actually gotten, I think when I made that post, we got like 3 or 4 apps right away. So I'm hoping that's gonna maybe give us some additional applications, but we won't really know for sure. So, all right, so I'll let Shane talk, and then we'll introduce Luis real quick.
Sir?
All right.
Thank you.
All right, so, as all of you now know for sure, Sunday was my final day serving as a full-time police officer for the city. On November 21st, I accepted a full-time position as a sheriff's deputy for the Guthrie County Sheriff's Office. I would like to start by thanking the city of Stuart and Chief Rioja for the opportunity to serve the citizens and build my law enforcement career. Over the last 5 years, I have learned and developed valuable skills and experience that have prepared me for the many challenges the law enforcement face on a daily basis. Chief Rioja's professionalism, knowledge, and guidance has been second to none, and I truly wouldn't be where I am today without his valuable guidance. I was hired as a reserve officer in April of 2020. During this time, the police department was short-staffed due to Officer Irving attending the Iowa Law Enforcement Academy and Officer Geisinger being absent due to maternity leave. This shortage left Chief Rioja and I to fill in and maintain adequate coverage. In November of 2020, I accepted the position of full-time officer and attended the Iowa Law Enforcement Academy in August of 2021 and graduated December 17th of 2021. Upon being hired, I signed a contract with the city stating that I would stay employed with the city for 4 years due to the city paying the costs associated with attending the Iowa Law Enforcement Academy. With that being said, I have fallen short of meeting that obligation by 17 days. I am here asking you all to consider waiving the remaining 17 days without penalty. Something I encourage you to consider is the large amount of unpaid overtime that I have accumulated over the last 4 years. Recently, another city employee requested to be back paid for vacation time that he was not able to take. I too am requesting that the council consider paying me for the vacation days that I was unable to take due to understaffing and caseload. Thank you for your time and consideration. Questions for me?
Shane, I want to personally thank you for the time you put in for us.
Thank you.
Absolutely, thank
Yeah,
you.
same here.
Thank you very much.
Yeah.
Wish you the best of luck.
Thank you.
Yeah, I haven't been on the fire department, and I know that this has been a big thing for you, so I'm
Sure.
happy to see you achieve that, so
Yeah, I'm sure.
congratulations, yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Appreciate it.
Absolutely. Okay. Yeah, and I think, like Mike was saying earlier, if you just want to discuss with Ash, maybe, and they can let us know
Okay, yeah. I'll get-
what you're thinking or whatever, because we have no idea, like,
Yeah.
your hours and stuff like
Yeah,
that.
I'll get
so.
with chief and see what, we'll go back and look and see for sure on what the exact numbers are and then try to figure something out.
Yeah, absolutely.
All right, thank you guys.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you.
Appreciate it.
While we're at it, I've already introduced him on paper, but he wasn't able to attend that meeting, so this is Luis. He's the newest officer that we hired, a month ago. So, just wanted to introduce him to all you guys, and gonna say anything? or-
Put you in the spotlight.
Yeah, I believe I met most of you, but yeah, like you said, my name's Luis Lopez. I'm from Nevada, fairly small town, so yeah, I'm looking forward to it. I'm thankful for the opportunity from the city and from Chief, so
Thanks for being here.
Welcome.
Thank you.
Best of luck to you.
thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, I'll move on to the next one. This is the one that'll kill all the time for Chip to get here, so. Got some more handouts for you. So, was doing some research, looking into what we were gonna do for this period of time. So there's 3 things here, there's 1 for each of you. And believe it or not, this does in part go into what's gonna be discussed later in the meeting, and that's why I feel it's important to bring it up right now, but it's also important because as the chief, I have an obligation to let you guys know these things, you know, as soon as I find out about them, so. I've got a little prepared statement I'm gonna read to you, and then there's those things that I included in there are gonna be referenced in here. Council members, the purpose of this notice is to clearly outline several compliance and safety concerns affecting the Stuart Police Department. These issues involve federal requirements, state expectations, and existing city policies. I wanna emphasize that I'm not presenting this as formal legal advice, rather this summary reflects information from federal and state sources, professional guidance, and widely accepted HR and municipal best practices. My goal is to ensure the council has full visibility into the situations so that informed decisions can be made moving forward. First, regarding overtime requirements. Under the Fair Labor Standards Act, commonly heard as FLSA, the small agency overtime exemption applies only when a municipality employs fewer than 5 law enforcement officers, and part-time officers are counted the same as full-time officers. This interpretation is confirmed in the U.S. Department of Labor fact sheet number 8, which I've handed to you guys. It also is confirmed in the Iowa League of Cities guidance. It's an opinion letter that I also included for you guys. Particularly the Iowa League of Cities guidance explains in detail, or at least mentions in part-time and reserve officers count towards the 5-officer threshold. So Stuart has been at or above this threshold for several years, meaning the exemption does not apply for the 5 officers. So when we hired Shane in 2020, he was our 4th full-time officer. We've utilized Chris Reha as a reserve officer. We've utilized other part-time officers to fill in shifts. So every one of those part-time officers counts towards that 5-man rule. So we've actually been over that 5-man threshold since 2020 at least. There's even periods in time back before then that we would have been over that 5-man threshold. So Stuart has been at or above that threshold for several years, meaning the exemption does not apply. Because the city also never implemented a 7K work period, the FLSA defaults to the standard rule: overtime must be paid after 40 hours in a 7-day period. Second, the city's own written policy requires overtime at time and 1/2. The employee handbook, which we all get when we're newly hired, clearly states that all employees earn overtime at 1.5 times their regular rate. The policy contains no disclaimer stating that the handbook is not a contract, which courts often consider when determining whether handbook language is binding. Each officer also signs a form acknowledging this handbook's authority. These concerns have been raised for several years, along with repeated recommendations to update the handbook. Third, Iowa law requires that cities provide adequate, safe, and reasonable law enforcement services. With staffing levels temporarily reduced, maintaining 24/7 coverage would require 24 to 36-hour shifts. Research from the National Institute for Occupational Safety and Health and the International Association of Chiefs of Police and numerous liability insurance case studies consistently show that extended shifts significantly increase the likelihood of fatigue-related crashes and injuries, delayed reaction times, impaired judgment, liability exposure for municipalities. The list goes on and on. Insurance carriers routinely reference these standards in determining risk. If an incident occurs while an officer is impaired by excessive work hours, the city may face increased liability exposure or coverage challenges. Fourth, unavoidable overtime from January through April is projected to reach nearly $50,000. This is talking with our 2 shifts that are going to be open from Luis going to the academy and Shane's absence. This estimate does not include potential costs arising from fatigue-related incidents, worker compensation claims, or insurance adjustments. The financial impact is significant, but necessary to maintain safe and legal staffing. Fifth, part-time and reserve recruitment is not currently viable at current funding. A statewide recruitment circulated to thousands of officers resulted in 0 applicants. So that same Facebook page I was talking about a little bit ago, I did last year when we were looking for part-time employees, I did a similar thing on that. We got no interest for part-time employment. Also, where was I? We most recently lost a full-time officer to a neighboring agency offering better compensation, something we had previously warned could occur. And our reserve officer earns a higher wage in a nearby city. He's actually been here 10 years, he's been there 5 years. Earlier investment and retention of part-time support may have prevented some of these present challenges. These issues are long-standing, well-documented, and now time-sensitive. My intent in presenting this information is to help ensure that Stuart remains compliant with its legal obligations while also protecting the safety of our officers and the community. My recommended next steps, and a lot of this, me and Ash met today and talked, I mean, a lot of these issues would be at least helped with what we're gonna discuss later in the meeting. But my recommendations for the next steps to move forward compliance and stabilize operations, I respectfully recommend that the council consider the following priority actions. Begin paying overtime as required by federal law by the city's own handbook. Address short-term staffing needs, including competitive pay for full-time and part-time positions. Number 3, update the employee handbook, particularly sections related to overtime, compensation, and emergency staffing. Number 4, review budget needs and risk management concerns related to extended shifts, liability exposure, and essential equipment and training. Council members, the Stuart Police Department remains committed to providing the highest level of service to this community. We can continue to meet that commitment, but doing so requires that we remain compliant with the laws and the policies that govern our work, and ensure a safe, sustainable operating environment. I appreciate your time and consideration, and I'm available to discuss any part of this information further if you want. If there's any questions, I'm more than willing to answer what I know. I'm not an expert in this, but I gave you those handouts to kind of answer some of those questions for you.
In this sheet here, Chief.
Yep.
It says on that second page, like that third paragraph down, at the bottom of that paragraph, that last sentence said, that you could accrue up to 480 hours of comp time. Do you guys get comp time now?
No.
Ash, is this anything that you've discussed with our HR rep?
Absolutely. And I told you.
And you have done that? Or
No,
you're gonna be in the process of doing that?
Yes.
Because, I mean, I appreciate the information, it's just that I can't sit here, I can't take history, I'm not
Sure.
even gonna try.
Sure.
You know,
What-
that'd be something.
What I
Yeah.
recommended to Ash today, when me and him and then the mayor met, I gave him similar information to this. I also gave him copies of the federal code, that covers this, specifically the Iowa code. And we discussed that we would give it to the city's legal
Okay.
attorney, whatever, if they wanna be an employment attorney or the regular city attorney and get a legal opinion. I'm not a lawyer, you guys aren't lawyers, I don't expect you to make that decision. I just have an obligation to the chief, when I find something like this, I have to present it to you, I can't not. So that's why I'm presenting it to you now.
And at any given point in your career here, have you guys been paid overtime? Is this something that come and goes, or?
So,
I mean, just walk me through it, cause I'm dumb here when.
so currently the way it works is if we're down an officer, like for instance with Officer Martinson leaving, we have the availability to use his salary to cover some of the costs to, like, so if I fill a shift that was normally his, typically what the city's gonna do is pay me at his hourly rate to fill that shift. So obviously I've been here 18 years, my hourly rate is much higher than his hourly rate. So when I work his shift, I go down to his hourly rate to cover that shift. There's been other times, so that's just planned when we have an absence, when we have that money to use. There's other times where, like for Good Egg Days, we get it approved, so that we get paid straight time for that. So we do get paid overtime, but it's not time and a half overtime, it's just our hourly rate. And then we do get paid for like holidays. Our shifts are 12-hour shifts, so if we work a holiday, we'll get an extra 6 hours of straight pay to basically kind of pay us time and a half for that day. But the officers that don't work that holiday, they don't get paid anything. So they just get the day off as normal, but they don't get paid anything, on top of that. So it's only the officer that works that gets paid the extra 6 hours. Now, with that said, there are many, many times where, we're doing a search warrant and then all of us are out or several of us are out. Just in the last 2 weeks, I could come up with probably a list of 3 or 4 times where myself or another officer has been out to assist with a domestic or a dangerous person that we had to have more officers for. When Officer Martinson had his shooting, all 4 of us at one point were at that scene. Those types of scenes, we don't get paid anything for. I don't get any overtime, I don't get straight time, I don't get a penny more, they don't get a penny more, because we're not able to use that missing officer's salary. So we have 0 money to go towards, in the budget, to go towards that. So it's kind of hard to give you a number, because if we went back and looked, I mean, there's probably several times a year where we're in excess of those hours, we're not getting paid anything for it. And then there's some hours that we're getting straight time, but it's on whoever's missing's hourly rate, not ours. And then there's other times like the holiday or Good Egg Days where we get paid a little differently, so. Does that answer it?
Yeah, so, and I'm not a lawyer by no means, we all know that, but I always thought that if you guys are responding to help your fellow teammates for work comp issues, I thought you had to be on the clock for that to work. If you guys get hurt for work comp to cover that, I thought you had to be on the clock.
I mean, I'm not an insurance expert, but I think you'd probably be right in that, I don't know. It's definitely, it's a pretty standard practice. I will say, and you guys are welcome to do your own research, but when I dug into this 5-man rule, there's some case law out there that talks about how obscure this law actually is and how few cities actually take advantage of that law. And so it's one of those things that you could even talk to an HR expert and they're like, I've never heard of that rule. I've never heard of the 5-man rule because most departments don't use it. So when I first came here, Panora, Stuart, Adair, and Greenfield were all using that rule. And I think at some point, I could be wrong, I don't know, but before I got here, I think at some point they probably discussed policies and said, hey, we can do this legally, and as long as we're under 5 officers, it's perfectly kosher, let's do it. Since then, I've been told that Adair and Greenfield, which are still smaller departments than ours, no longer do that. They pay overtime. They have their own calculation they use. Panora is still using the 5-man rule, but they're 3 officers. To be honest, and this is for them to decide, but they have a pretty good part-time staff. I would imagine there's probably pay periods where they're over 5 officers based on their part-time help. But, so it's always been kind of a regional thing, but if we reach out to like other areas, it's really hard to find police departments that do this. Now, I'm sure there's plenty that do, but when we did our comparisons, when we brought comparisons to you guys in the past, one of the questions we asked is, do you offer overtime pay and time and a half and all that? And most of the responses we got were like, of course we pay overtime, why wouldn't we? And some of those departments were smaller than ours. They were 2-man departments, 3-man departments. So, you know, it is what it is. If we're under 5 people, it is perfectly legal to do. It's in the federal code. But as soon as you get 5 or more and part-time employees count, that's when that threshold stops and it's required to pay time and a half overtime. And actually, just because I have it right here and we're talking about, so this is the federal code right here, and it literally says, no distinction is made between full-time and part-time employees or between employees on duty and employees on leave status, and all such categories must be counted in determining whether the exemption applies. And that's talking specifically about the 5-man exemption. So we've been well over 5 since at least 2020. You could go back to 2020 and say we hired our full-time and we've utilized part-time staff consistently since then to cover open shifts.
So, just kind of making it funny, I bet you when you go on vacation or whatever, all your other officers would love to cover for you to get that wage though, right?
Yeah, it doesn't work like that. It should, but yeah, so when, when it's like a vacation, it's not, they're just paid at straight time, their regular hours. The only time we use another officer's salary is if they've left. So like if I quit and there was an absence of my salary, then I'm assuming Ash would say, yeah, you guys could use that to fund these open shifts. But usually that's not the way it works. It's usually one of the officers that are lower on the totem pole. And so, you know, for instance, if you did a time and a half, you know, version of my salary versus, you know, Officer Martinson's, you're probably looking at double, if not more, to work those hours. So I would be making half as much money working that open shift for him as I would just covering one of my own shifts.
So not to say that we need to avoid paying you guys overtime by no means, but if we get fully staffed and have 5 officers on, and keep 5 officers on, then you don't have overtime issues.
I think the goal here is to get the staff at a competitive rate to where we're not losing officers.
Correct.
Then you don't have that overtime, you don't have as many absences. Are there gonna be some? Sure. But I don't think that you're gonna see as many of them. The other thing that I do wanna address really quickly, this is the Iowa code. So, under Iowa code 91A.7, I'll just read the whole thing, it's a very short code. It's titled wage disputes. If there is a dispute between an employer and employee concerning the amount of wages or expenses reimbursement due, the employer shall, without condition and pursuant to section 91A.3, pay all wages conceded to be due and reimburse all expenses conceded to be due, less any lawful deductions specified in section 91A.5. Payment of wages or reimbursement of expenses under this section shall not relieve the employer of any liability for the balance of wages or expenses claimed by the employee. Again, I'm not a lawyer and I'm not pretending to be, but to me that means that as soon as the city is aware that there's a problem here, the city has an obligation to make sure that they compensate the person that is owed the money. The next section is 91A.8, damages recoverable by an employee. When it has been shown that an employer has intentionally failed to pay an employee wages or reimburse expenses pursuant to section 91A.3, whether as a result of a wage dispute or otherwise, the employer shall be liable to the employee for any wages or expenses that are so intentionally failed to be paid or reimbursed, plus liquidated damages, court costs, and any attorney fees incurred in recovering the unpaid wages and determined to have been to be usual and necessary. In other instances, the employer shall be liable only for unpaid wages or expenses, court costs, and usual and necessary attorney's fees incurred in recovering the unpaid wages and expenses. Again, I'm not an attorney, but to me that means if they find out that you did in fact owe that money and you didn't pay it right away, then the employer or the employee could go out, seek damages and all sorts of other things. And that's what I'm trying to avoid by fixing this.
Do you have record of all overtime worked?
So we have, it's kind of a depends question. So every single pay period that we work, we're scheduled for 84 hours. If you do our 12-hour shifts, that's just how it works out. So every pay period, there's at least 4 hours above the 80 that we would, you know, I could prove that all the way back to when I started here. There are times where our overtime is documented and there's times that it's not because we don't get reimbursed for it. So there's times that, you know, we get called out in the middle of the night, or we get, you know, our assistance is needed somewhere else, and it's not on our timesheet because we're not gonna be reimbursed for it. So it depends.
Okay. Sounds like this is serious issue that we need to really check into. Were you guys aware of this that he's bringing to us?
I met with him 3 hours ago before the meeting.
Quite a few hours.
Okay.
Yeah, we met for an hour or so today before the meeting, so he just gave me this information.
And to be clear too, so I brought this up in public meetings before, me and Ash have discussed it many times. The 5-man rule is no secret, we've all discussed it at times.
Mm-hmm.
The miscommunication, I would say, I was always told that it was 5 full-time officers. Every time I brought it up in a public meeting, every time I discussed it with anybody, it was always explained to me that it's 5 full-time officers. As in reading the code here this last weekend, I figured that is absolutely not the case. Now, this is not normally my purview. I'm a police chief, I don't get into employment law, I get into criminal law. So the only reason I was even looking into this was because of some of the issues that we're trying to address with compensation and whatnot. You know, and I brought it to you guys as quickly as I could. To be honest, within the next 4 months, we're gonna be working so much overtime. You know, had I had ill intent, I would have brought it up to you after we worked all those extra hours that are coming up in the next 4 months. I'm trying to get this situated before we go into the next 4 months, because we're gonna have a lot of overtime hours in the next 4 months. And I think this needs to be addressed before we get there.
Yeah, I agree.
And Dave and I said to Ash, this needs immediate attention with the lawyer.
Yeah, and I'm
Yeah,
not,
for sure.
I 100% agree with that. Obviously, the city's gotta have an attorney look at it, and I think you should.
Yeah.
But I also think that we need to have that done very quickly, because our pay period is gonna, you know, come soon, and I think we need to have an answer before that next pay period.
Yeah, and within 4 months of having that kind of overtime, that's gonna do some serious issues with the checkbook.
Yeah. And that's why I think if we were able to figure out a way to get that budget, increased a little bit, equipment, compensation, whatever, if we can find a way to attract some candidates that'll work here, that we can keep, then we're not gonna have those openings, we're not gonna have those open shifts.
Yeah.
I think until we do that though, we're gonna be risking, having openings, and that's gonna cost more money, and I'm trying to prevent that extra cost. It's cheaper to have full-time staff and not have overtime
Right.
hours than to have a bunch of overtime hours.
Mm-hmm. Exactly.
And you think back to all the times you drive around at night, you see the night officer, and then see chief or another officer, they're realizing they're not getting paid. The second officer.
Yeah.
Numerous times.
Okay.
You guys ever do on-call shifts, or you've got somebody on patrol 24 hours a day, 7 days a week?
So a lot of times, if we have an excess of overtime, we try to use as much on-call time as we can. And I actually have it in one of these, but it's something that the attorney should answer for you guys, but there's some language in the code that basically says if you're on call and you're required to respond at a moment's notice, that's paid time.
Sure.
So even those hours would still go towards our hourly cost.
Right.
And you'd still be due overtime even with those on-call hours. So it gives us a little bit of a break, but as far as the financial cost, it's gonna cost the same. Really the best option that I can think of, and this is why we had a really solid reserve program years ago, and we were trying to build that reserve program. Reserves can be volunteers if we choose them to be. Once you pay them though, they're no longer they're paid employees, they're no longer volunteers. The problem though is this job has gotten so incredibly expensive compared to what it was. When I first started, our radios, we could buy a new one of these for about $250. I just got these quoted, so these are the ones you guys bought us with the COVID relief money. Back then, I think we paid around $5 grand for one of these radios. I just got a quote for Luis when we hired him, $7,500 for this radio, $2,000 for this taser. The guns that we carry that are ours, I mean, mine was $2,500 bucks. The holster for it's $300. These vests, $2,000. I'm wearing probably $5,000 to $10,000 worth of equipment that I can't ask a reserve is gonna do this for free. Hey, we're gonna just make you go buy all that stuff. I think if we had a way that we could maybe fund some of those reserve programs, we could give them some of that equipment. You might have some guys that would be willing to fill in on a volunteer basis on some of these shifts. The problem though is, we're bound by law that we cannot use those in lieu of a position that was already there. So we can use them in emergencies, we can use them like on a search warrant when we need an extra set of hands, but we can't use them to like regularly fill a certain shift as a volunteer, because then we'd be in trouble for other labor laws. So it would help, it's definitely it's one of the things that would work, and when we had a reserve program, it was working, but most of those guys, they can't afford to keep it up.
I'm real curious, how'd you get officers to fill in these shifts if they're getting paid less than their regular wage?
You'd have to ask
And you don't
them.
have to answer that, chief, I'm talking out the side of my head right
You
now.
have to ask them, but I mean, I think everybody has their own reasons. I mean, they did get paid something. I mean, I will say that. I'm not trying to hide the fact that they got paid, it's just they weren't paid a time and a half.
Right.
So they got paid at an hourly rate that was, you know, consistent with their regular pay, and you know, may have been worth it. Again, I don't wanna speak for them, but I think just knowing who works here, there's a lot of people here that care enough about this community that they were willing to do it anyways. You know, but that doesn't mean that we don't have a legal requirement to pay them the way we should, you know? And so we have a lot of officers, in my entire time here, and not just these guys, but the guys I've had in the past, I have never once called someone and said, I need you here, and they're like, nope, sorry. They are always willing to respond, they're always willing to answer, and I would hope they would say the same thing about me. When they call me at 2 o'clock in the morning and say, Chief, I need you, I am out the door and I'm there. And never once have I said, well, let me call a city person, see if we're gonna get paid for this. We've always been willing to help first and then worry about the pay later. You know, so I think honestly, to answer your question, a lot of those shifts get filled because they know they need to.
Yeah. Okay. What a good information.
Any other questions?
No, I think we have our homework, I guess,
Yes.
unless somebody else has questions, I guess, but we got some homework to do.
Okay, thanks, chief.
Yep. Thank you.
Thanks.
Okay, 4, public hearing on proposed to enter in a general obligation corporate purpose loan agreement. This time I'll open the public hearing. Did you receive anything, Aggie? Any comments, concerns to the public? Close the public hearing. 5, resolution number 2530C, taking additional action. And we'll just have Chip talk about this.
You bet. Good evening, Chip Schultz. I apologize for being late, and these did take a header in the snow, so I hope they're not too, one of those days. So,
Better those than you.
So what I've reviewed there, it outlines, it reviews, and then this is the email, that was sent, that I sent last week, just as background to everybody, in case you wanted a printed copy. So, if you go to the, if you don't mind going to the, second page, please. So what we intended to do when we had the, and I appreciate the council having a special meeting tonight, that's very generous with your time. On the second page, this reviews what we had talked about as the concept for the financing at the late October special meeting. This is what's assumed, and just wanted to recap this. There was assumed to be $85,000 in funding for a street department work truck, $200,000 for police department equipment. Those are both were assumed to be tax exempt, fundable. Under the taxable, item A, which we have found out now, working through this with city's bond counsel, Dorsey and Whitney, the city can no longer, this isn't used frequently. The city funded general fund budgetary support in 2020. That's the last time I'd worked on such a financing. So we found out that there was property tax reform that took that option away as a funding source. So item 2A, we cannot do in terms of being able to fund that from a general obligation bond issue. So that's the challenge that we've been working through. Also, similarly, we cannot do item 2B, that was assumed for rescue. So we've been brainstorming to try to find other solutions. But what we can do is item 2C for dead and diseased trees. So that's kind of some background. The following page, page 3 of 8, this includes what's the proposed or assumed financing framework that's included in the attached. I've broken out the same 85,000 for a tree department work truck, same 200,000 for police department equipment, and then what we've shifted gears to for the council's review tonight, maintaining the funding for city insurance, which we still can do, rolling together 3 years of funding with the thought that there's a potential that the legislature might take that option away in the upcoming legislative session in 2026, and then funding the diseased trees removal. Also, there's funding for salaries that's broken out in different forms, not from cash on hand, not from a bond issue, and I'll show that in the later pages. So the page 4 of 8, the next page, this is what similar to what we looked at the late October special council meeting. This reviews the existing city debt and 2 proposed debts in columns R and S that are broken out as the proposed taxable and tax exempt financings. What's broken out in column G, the historic years of the city's debt service levy are the first 4 years through fiscal year 25-26. After the funding that was on the prior pages included or accounted for, the city's debt levy is forecasted to be lower. You can see it goes from $3.81 in column G to $2.64 is what's proposed for fiscal year 26-27. How can that be lower when you're adding debt? So here's why. So the annual insurance borrowing, that's assumed to be rolled into what's in column R. The debt issue from 2020, that payment drops off. It has a 2026, that's in column O, has a 2026 final payment, and I've assumed that the insurance borrowing is less per year. That has a mitigating impact on your debt levy. Why do you want the debt levy to be lower? Because you're within the context of an overall, we talked about round terms about $1 higher levy. In the context of an overall higher levy, the lower the debt levy is, that means the more the levy room is available to fund operations. So the goal or the target, consistent with the discussion we had in October, was open up more funding for salaries from your levy for operations and fund some of that from cash on hand. I'll get into the detail on that on the next page. So what's assumed then for at the bottom right in table 3, and I'll tell you, next time I will bring one of those larger sheets of paper, because this is not easy. This is a pickled student. Sorry about that. So the city's historic levy is at the table at the bottom right of the page through fiscal year 26, 6 years of history. Then what's assumed for the future levy is in the green shaded row and everything after. So that's what, I just want to note that because that's what's assumed for the city's overall levy framework. So taking that data, the following page, page 5 of 8, lays out, so the city has to the extent that your tax base is not needed to fund TIF debt service payments, the rest kind of flows for operations. So that's why there's a breakout in columns D, E, and F. Column D is the amount, including history for operations. Column E is the amount needed to pay TIF debt obligations. That's elevated, as we've talked about multiple times, through fiscal year 29-30. Total taxable valuations in green, column F. And then I note what's estimated in actual. TIF consolidated levies in column H. Resulting TIF revenues in column I. And then the city's levy for operations, or kind of call it general fund, that's in column J. So that levy for operations in column J, that's what drives resulting property tax dollars in column K. And then what's assumed to be funded from general fund reserves is shown in column L. So you'll note that those 4 years, column L, total 330,000. If you tie the 200 plus the 100 rescue, that totaled 300. So I've assumed we're a little bit above that. This will change. This is certainly something the council needs time to noodle on, and this will change based on what your direction and review is. So that is assumed to be a spend down in column L of the general fund balance. What's shown then in column M is that it's shown as a negative, but it's shown as an offset to revenue. That's what I showed it as a negative. That shows the general fund cash being rebuilt. So if you go through the end of fiscal year 32, 33, out 8 years, that general fund cash is spent down and rebuilt within that time period. Because it's certainly not a comfortable thing to spend that cash down, but so I wanted to lay out a clear path where it could be rebuilt and replenished. What's netted out then in column N as in Nancy is the total funding for operations, and I wanted to include some history there as well as what's forecast going forward. So the change in funding, the change from column N from 1 year to the next, that's compared or noted in column Q with that kind of the outline, rectangular outline shape. So if you look at the gray shaded row, fiscal year 26, 27, the additional funding between cash and new property tax revenue, this isolates general fund property tax revenue only, not other general fund revenue. It's a change of 65,000 as noted in column Q in the gray shaded row, fiscal year 26, 27. And then the future years, it lists a change year over year versus the prior year, and then that's broken out in percentage terms in column R. So I note also, as the TIF debt falls off, I've assumed just hypothetically that the city, you have the Front Street project that you're contemplating, there's new debt added, that's noted in footnote. This is just hypothetical, so noted in footnote D, footnote D. Pardon me, it's C. It's toward the end of footnote C. So I've assumed there's an additional 100,000 in TIF debt added in fiscal year 29, 30, 250,000 in 31, 32, and 500,000 a year annually thereafter. Whether that happens, that's obviously up to you as a council, but I doubt there's gonna, you have other infrastructure projects to take on. So I didn't wanna assume that that's zero for the future. That's important because it, whatever's not used for operations goes to TIF, and whatever's not used for TIF goes to operations. So the comparison, I guess, in column Q and the revenue for operations in column N, assuming the cash reserves are applied in column L, that's the kind of the change that this would reflect going forward if this financing plan is pursued by the city. So to me, the next page maybe is the most useful to look at. These are just the project that would be, or assumed to be funded with a bond issue. There's a tax exempt series, series 2025C. That includes the work truck and the police department equipment specifically. And the insurance expense, this is assumed to be 3 years. That's under the taxable financing. And then the removal of dead disease trees from Dorsey, when they indicate that's taxable, because there's an element there that there's involvement with private property. So when that's the case, it's gonna be a taxable financing.
Are we looking to hire somebody to remove dead disease trees?
We're probably gonna do that, yes.
Okay, cause we have the man that cut down a ton of trees, so I didn't know why we need to borrow $200,000 to cut down
We're
more
talking
trees.
about a big plan, not just.
And on
trees.
personal property, sounds like, not just city property? Is that-
It's in the right of way, but I think there's a concern that that's benefiting the personal property owner, but it's only the ones in the right of way. It's not the
Okay.
ones on true private property.
Okay.
I think the monitoring's being that way just out of an abundance of caution. And it's less tedious for the city to keep track of, so it's ultimately it's a The tax exempt is proposed to be, go out through 2036, so it's proposed to be a 10-year. The taxable is proposed to be 8 years. That's most clearly broken out on page 7 of 8. That's the tax exempt on 7 of 8, and then 8 of 8 is the taxable bond issue. And these are just estimated, I think, conservative or high interest rates.
So if we do the 3 years of insurance, once that we're past that 3 years, we're gonna take out another bond for the insurance again, so now you're gonna be paying interest on something that's already done.
And then do it
And,
again.
yeah, and you still got payments for another 7 years, and then you're gonna have to take out another bond to cover the insurance at that point.
Why are
More
we-
than likely.
Why are we taking out loans to pay for our insurance? Are we just
That's-
overspent and we don't have that money available?
The reason you're able to do that, and it lowered, the city first did that, I think, about 5 years ago.
Yeah.
But the benefit in doing that, it lowered the city's levy roughly, I think, $2 a thousand. Why does it make sense? It makes sense because you get to, if you look at page 5 of 8, this most clearly breaks it out. So if you do fund the insurance through a bond issue, and so that levy gets applied on page 5 of 8, that levy gets applied to in column F as in Frank or Foxtrot. That 98,255,000 for the taxable valuation total, tip and base. That levy gets applied to that 98 million. If you apply it toward the operating levy, the base only, that gets applied to the column D number, as in delta. So that's 34,266,000. So your tax base is almost triple by having it funded by a debt levy. The concern of that is that might go away if the legislature changes that next year or in 2027. So, and the hope too is the cities will be beyond the years of elevated TIF debt. Hopefully in the budget in like 29-30 or 30-31 fiscal years, the regular city operating budget can fund that insurance, or at least part of it.
When will we know for sure our new valuation? I know you got estimated in here for 26, 27.
It should be sometime this month, I think.
Oh, really? Okay.
It's-
So it could be higher than the 100 million, right? Hopefully.
I think it should be. This should be conservative, but I don't know yet.
Okay. Because I'm just wondering if we didn't make a definite decision tonight, if we waited to see what that was, is that gonna hurt us?
I think that's possible, but I think the risk that you run, and so you're making a guess on when during the legislative session might the insurance borrowing authority be taken away. Are they likely to do that? And I haven't talked to Ash about this, but is that likely to happen in January? Another big property tax reform bill? Probably not. Could it happen? Yes, it could. So you're gambling, you're taking an estimate that the legislature takes
Sure.
action early in the session.
So you recommended pass this now, rather than wait?
I'd go forward with it sooner than later. I think you, as the council, I think you're gonna need some time to think about this and consider it, because you're just getting this now. So this is, sorry I couldn't have this done earlier, but there's been a lot of moving parts to try to get to this point.
And I kind of want to go to your point, Trevor, on the 200,000 for the trees, you know, because I had talked to Jim and he was kind of like, he doesn't understand why we're taking that money for that tree project either, because he was like,
Okay.
he could use road use money. We have the money that we could call from the utilities. We got about 500,000 there. So have we taken any of that into consideration, or?
What the amount is totally up to the city. I follow your direction. I don't pick the amount, so.
Sure.
If you want it to be less, let's make it less.
You
The
know,
500,000 you're saying from utilities, is that from previous
projects that.
projects that they're paying on?
Right,
Okay.
right, that they had agreed to pay part of the.
Okay.
Part of that. So, yeah.
Overtime.
Yeah,
Sure.
overtime, you know, and, I mean, and even if we didn't, if we just took it as needed or asked for it as needed, something like that, you know. Even like for equipment and stuff, if they came up, and said, hey, we need equipment, whatever department it is, you know, if we could use that instead of getting a big loan out there, stretching over 10 years, using, it's like buying groceries and paying for it on your credit card and then not paying it off every month, right? You know, and you're just paying interest on that, then you're gonna have to do it again. More than likely.
More than likely.
More than likely.
If
Yeah,
that
we-
authority's still available.
yeah, yeah, if it's still there, I get, yeah, so, but and you know, we got discussion coming up on, traffic lights and stuff to help bring revenue in. You know, cause we need sources of revenue rather than just jacking up property taxes because, you know, everybody's got homeowners insurance, if that goes up, then your property value's gonna go up, so now you're double whammying everybody in town. You only got 1,800 people. I'm sure food prices are gonna continue to rise, gas prices, you got all that, you know. And I think sometimes we kinda get a little cocooned here and think, well, it's just $98 a year, you know, for somebody, and don't take that into consideration, but I was under the same impression, you know, why are we doing 200,000, so I
Well,
did talk to
one
Jim.
thing, Sarah, is there a way we can check back and see how many trees we subbed out? We got a list on how many the city cut down, but how many we actually subbed out, and the cost. I know Jim said there's a lot of maples that's coming up and everything else, but, you know, possibly see, like Trevor says, we've got our own lift. If we can take care of some, maybe some of them are way too big to Swinger or some town take
Yeah,
care
I
of.
get that. That's
Just-
gonna come up
That's
for
a lot
sure.
of money, and I just like to know
Okay,
the amount
but-
we subbed out.
Yeah, I think we got that dollar amount as an estimate from Jim.
Yeah, okay.
It wasn't really a hard number or anything, it was
Right.
just an estimate from Jim Henderson.
Yeah.
And we build on it.
But maybe before the December 8th meeting, we can have that information.
Yeah, definitely we have it, you know. Right now, we're at the point that we passed the public hearing. The dollar amount can always be reduced if you want it. We are at a point we need to pass a resolution to take the next step. And you can, if you don't wanna do the trees and all this stuff, that's fine, but I think the remaining of the whole thing is necessity.
I think I'd encourage the resolution to be passed, knowing that you still wanna evaluate what your cost is. So you've got the public hearing authority to go up to 220,000 for trees. If you decide that's 50 or 80 or 120,000 later, great.
Okay, so,
You still have.
okay, so we're not
you don't have to
deciding
be-
the amount right now, we can.
Yeah, we're not locked into it.
We're just saying we're going to, it's like a, you're okay to spend up to this. I get it, I
Yeah,
get it,
yeah.
okay.
So we need a motion for the resolution number 2530C.
I'll make that motion.
Moved by Kirkpatrick,
I'll second.
second by Nelson. How do you vote? Russell?
Yes.
Kirkpatrick?
Yes.
Nelson?
Yes.
Cobal?
Yeah,
Thank you, Chip.
Thank you.
Good work. That was the road, Chip. How was the road?
Very dry.
It's fine.
Is it?